The sun hung low over the Wyoming territory, painting the October sky in shades of rust and blood. Samuel Hartley stood at the edge of his father's grave, the freshly turned earth still dark against the pale prairie grass. At 19, he was too young to inherit such burdens. Yet here he was, master of 800 acres of unforgiving land and a herd of cattle that seemed to eye him with the same skepticism as the townsfolk. The wind carried dust and the scent of sage as Samuel walked back toward the ranch house, his boots crunching on the dried earth. The Hartley ranch sprawled before him like a challenge written in weathered wood and barbed wire. The main house, built by his father's own hands 20 years prior, stood sturdy but worn, its shingles curling like old leather under the relentless sun. Beyond it, the barn leaned slightly eastward, as if perpetually bracing against the prairie winds. "Boy ain't got the backbone for it," muttered Jake Morrison from his wagon as he passed on the road. The neighboring rancher didn't bother lowering his voice. "Give it 6 months. That land'll be up for sale. Mark my words." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. Let them talk. His father had taught him that action spoke louder than words in this harsh country. Still, the weight of their doubts pressed on his shoulders like a yoke. The barn door groaned as he pushed it open. Checking on the horses before nightfall, the familiar smell of hay and leather should have been comforting, but tonight it only reminded him of his father's absence. Thomas Hartley had been a mountain of a man, respected and feared in equal measure. Samuel caught his reflection in a water trough, lean where his father had been broad, uncertain where his father had been decisive. "You're him, ain't you? The Hartley boy?" The voice startled him. A woman stood in the barn's entrance, silhouetted against the dying light. She wore a traveling cloak of deep brown wool, dust covered from the road. As she stepped into the barn, Samuel could make out her features, perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair pinned beneath a worn bonnet. Her eyes, green as bottle glass, held a weariness that seemed older than her years. "Yes, ma'am. Samuel Hartley." He straightened, trying to appear more man than boy. "Can I help you?" She studied him for a long moment, those sharp eyes taking in his youth, his grief, his uncertainty. "I'm Mrs. Catherine Dalton," she said finally. "I've come a long way, and I find myself in need of shelter for the night. Just a corner of your barn would suffice. I can pay." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. A widow, by the sound of it. Traveling alone was dangerous for any woman in these parts, but especially for one without protection. Yet propriety demanded certain boundaries. "There's a boarding house in town, ma'am, Mrs. Garrett runs a respectable—" "I've just come from town." Her voice carried an edge. "Mrs. Garrett was quite clear that her establishment has no room for women of uncertain reputation." The implication hung in the air between them. Samuel had heard such talk before. Widows who survived by whatever means necessary. Women who existed on the margins of respectability. His mother would have sent her away without a second thought. But his mother had been dead these 5 years. And his father had always said a man was measured by his kindness to those in need. "The barn's warm enough," Samuel heard himself saying. "There's fresh straw in the loft, and I can bring you blankets from the house." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "You're kind, Mr. Hartley. Kinder than most." As Samuel gathered blankets and a spare pillow from the house, he tried to ignore the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Jake Morrison. "Fool boy. Letting a strange woman sleep in your barn. What would your father think?" The evening had deepened to purple when he returned to the barn. Mrs. Dalton had already made herself a nest in the hayloft, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to making do. She accepted the blankets with a nod of thanks. "I'll bring you something to eat," Samuel offered. "No need to trouble yourself further." She settled against the hay, drawing her cloak tighter. "I've imposed enough." But Samuel was already heading back to the house, returning minutes later with bread, dried beef, and a canteen of water. She accepted these offerings with the same quiet dignity. "Your father," she said as he turned to leave. "I heard about his passing. He was a good man, from what folks say." Samuel paused at the ladder. "You knew him?" "Only by reputation. They say he was fair in his dealings, even with those others might overlook." She studied him again with those penetrating eyes. "I wonder if the son takes after the father?" "I suppose we'll find out," Samuel replied, surprising himself with his honesty. The walk back to the house felt longer than usual. The windows glowed with lamplight, but the warmth seemed hollow without his father's presence. Samuel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the ledgers that demanded attention. Numbers swam before his eyes, debts to pay, cattle to sell, hands to hire for the winter. The neighboring ranchers were circling like vultures, waiting for him to fail. Outside, a coyote howled, and the wind rattled the windows. Samuel's thoughts kept drifting to the barn, to the mysterious woman sheltering there. Catherine Dalton. The name meant nothing to him, but something about her presence unsettled him in ways that had nothing to do with propriety. He forced himself to focus on the ledgers until his eyes burned and the oil in the lamp ran low. When he finally climbed the stairs to his room, the old house creaking around him, Samuel paused at the window. The barn stood dark against the star-filled sky, keeping its secrets. That night, he dreamed of his father, not the strong man he remembered, but the fever-weakened shadow who'd gripped his hand at the end. "The land's yours now, boy," Thomas Hartley had whispered. "But it ain't the land that'll test you. It's the choices you make on it." Samuel woke to the sound of horses, not his own, but riders approaching from the road. Dawn was just breaking, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. He dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch, squinting against the early light. 3 riders approached, Jake Morrison and 2 of his sons. They reined up at the porch, their faces set in expressions of false concern. "Morning, Samuel," Jake said, touching his hat brim with mock courtesy. "Heard you had a visitor last night." News traveled fast in the territory. Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Can't say that's any of your business. Mr. Morrison." The older man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's everyone's business out here. Boy, your daddy understood that. Understood the importance of maintaining certain standards." "My father also understood Christian charity," Samuel replied, finding steel in his voice he didn't know he possessed. "That woman's trouble," one of Morrison's sons spat. "Everyone knows what kind of widow travels alone, seeking shelter in men's barns." Samuel's hands clenched at his sides. "You'll watch your tongue on my property. Pete Morrison." Jake Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "Your property for now, boy. But this land requires a firm hand, a man who makes wise choices, housing drifters and women of low character. Well, that speaks to poor judgment. The only poor judgment I see is 3 men riding onto another man's land uninvited at dawn," Samuel said. "I'll thank you to leave. Now." Morrison's face darkened, but he turned his horse. "You're young, Samuel. Young men make mistakes, but in this country, mistakes have consequences. You remember that." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Samuel standing on the porch with his heart hammering. He'd just made an enemy of the most powerful rancher in the county. And over what? A stranger seeking shelter? Movement caught his eye. Mrs. Dalton stood at the barn door, watching the riders disappear. Even from this distance, he could see the resigned set of her shoulders. She'd heard every word. Samuel walked toward her, his boots leaving prints in the morning dew. She met him halfway, her face composed, but her eyes holding that same world-weary look from the night before. "I'll be on my way," she said before he could speak. "I've brought you enough trouble. The day I let Jake Morrison dictate who can shelter on my land is the day I'm not worthy of it." Samuel said. The words came out fiercer than intended. She tilted her head, studying him anew. "You're young to be making such stands." "Maybe, but my father always said a man has to start somewhere." A smile, the first he'd seen from her, tugged at the corner of her mouth. 5 nights, she said softly. Ma'am? I need 5 nights' shelter. After that, I'll move on. I can work for my keep, cooking, mending, whatever needs doing. Samuel knew he should refuse, knew what the town would say, what it might cost him, but something in her eyes, that mixture of pride and desperation, made the decision for him. 5 nights, then, he agreed. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill, Samuel Hartley had the unsettling feeling that he'd just set something in motion that would change everything. The widow Dalton walked back to the barn, and he noticed the way she moved, graceful despite her travel-worn clothes, carrying herself like someone who'd learned to survive without bending. 5 nights. In this harsh country where a single storm could kill cattle and a bad decision could cost everything, 5 nights might as well be a lifetime. The first day passed in a blur of necessary work. Samuel threw himself into ranch duties, mending fences, checking water troughs, counting cattle, anything to avoid thinking about the woman in his barn. But as darkness fell and the evening meal sat heavy in his stomach, restlessness overtook him. The house felt too quiet, too empty. He found himself at the window, gazing toward the barn where a faint light flickered through the cracks in the wood. Unable to resist, he pulled on his coat and stepped into the cool night air. The stars spread overhead like spilled salt, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. He hadn't meant to check on her, or perhaps he had. Either way, his feet carried him to the barn door. He knocked softly on the wooden frame. Mrs. Dalton? Come in, Mr. Hartley. She sat in the loft on a makeshift seat of hay bales, a lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. She'd removed her bonnet, and her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. In the lamplight, she looked younger, though the weariness in her eyes remained. I wanted to ensure you had everything you need, Samuel said, climbing the ladder halfway. Your hospitality has been more than sufficient. She regarded him with those penetrating green eyes. Though I suspect that's not why you're here. Heat crept up his neck. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? She rose, moving to the edge of the loft with feline grace. A young man, alone in a big house, seeking company in his barn at night. What would the good people of town think? Samuel's hands tightened on the ladder rungs. I should go. Should you? She leaned against a support beam, the lantern light playing across her features. Tell me, Samuel Hartley, may I call you Samuel? How long has it been since you've had a real conversation? Not about cattle prices or land deeds, but something more. Against his better judgment, Samuel climbed the rest of the way up. My father wasn't much for talking beyond what needed saying. And your mother? Died when I was 14. Lung fever. Catherine nodded slowly. Loss has a way of shaping us, doesn't it? Making us either harder or softer, depending on our nature. Which did it make you? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Her smile held secrets. Both, I suppose. Hard enough to survive. Soft enough to still feel the hurt of it. She moved back to her hay bale seat, gesturing for him to sit across from her. You're wondering about me, about what kind of woman seeks shelter in strangers' barns. Samuel sat carefully, maintaining a proper distance. Your business is your own. How refreshingly naive. The words might have been mocking, but her tone held only gentle amusement. You've already paid a price for your kindness. The least I can do is satisfy your curiosity. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I was married at 17 to a man named Robert Dalton. He was 12 years my senior. Owned a small spread in Kansas. Not a bad man, just weak. When the drought came and the cattle died, he took to drinking. When drinking wasn't enough, he took to gambling. When the debts came due, she trailed off, her gaze distant. Samuel waited, sensing the weight of untold sorrow. They came at night, 3 men he owed money to. Robert tried to bargain, offer them the land, the remaining livestock. But they wanted to make an example. Her voice remained steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. I survived. Robert didn't. I'm sorry, Samuel said, the words inadequate. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've moved from town to town, taking work where I could find it. Seamstress, cook, sometimes nurse to the sick, but a widow alone, especially one who refuses certain propositions. She doesn't last long in any one place. The barn creaked around them, wood settling in the cool night. Samuel felt acutely aware of their isolation, of the impropriety of this midnight conversation. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. "Why here?" he asked. "Why stop at my ranch?" Catherine studied him for a long moment. "Honestly, exhaustion. I've been riding for 3 days, and your barn was the first shelter I saw after leaving town. But now," she tilted her head, "now I think perhaps fate had a hand in it." "I don't believe in fate." "No? Then what do you call it when a grieving boy and a weary widow cross paths at just the moment when both need something?" She stood abruptly, moving to the loft window. "5 nights. No rest for you. Samuel Hartley." The words sent an unexpected shiver through him. "What does that mean?" She turned back, her silhouette framed by starlight. "It means what you want it to mean. A warning, perhaps. Or a promise. Or simply the rambling of a tired woman who's forgotten the rules of proper conversation." Samuel rose, knowing he should leave, but finding himself drawn closer instead. "You speak in riddles, Mrs. Dalton." "Catherine," she corrected. "And you speak like a boy trying very hard to be a man." The words stung, but there was no cruelty in them. Samuel felt his cheeks burn. "I am a man. This ranch is proof enough of that." "Is it?" She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender sachets she must have tucked in her clothes. "Inheriting responsibility doesn't make you a man, Samuel. It's what you do with it that counts." They stood there, barely a foot apart, the air between them charged with something Samuel couldn't name. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been this close to girls before, at church socials and harvest dances, but never like this. Never with a woman who looked at him as if she could see straight through to his soul. "I should go," he said again, but didn't move. "Yes," she agreed, equally still. "You should." Another heartbeat passed, then another, finally. Samuel forced himself to step back, to break whatever spell had fallen over the barn. "Good night, Mrs. Dal, Catherine." "Good night, Samuel." He climbed down the ladder on unsteady legs, his mind whirling. At the barn door, he paused. "The offer stands. For work. I mean, the house needs tending, and I'm no hand at cooking." Her laugh followed him into the night. "We'll see what tomorrow brings." Samuel barely slept. He lay in his too large bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance. When dawn finally broke, he was already dressed and in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee without burning it. Catherine appeared at the kitchen door as the sun cleared the horizon. She'd pinned her hair up properly and straightened her clothes, but there was something different about her, a softness around the eyes that hadn't been there before. "That coffee smells like you're trying to poison someone," she observed. "Wouldn't be the first time," Samuel admitted, grateful for the normalcy of her teasing. She shooed him aside and took over, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the smell of proper coffee filled the air, along with biscuits she'd somehow conjured from the meager supplies. "You'll spoil me," Samuel said, savoring the first good meal he'd had since his father's death. "Unlikely," Catherine replied. "But a man needs proper food if he's going to run a ranch." They fell into an easy rhythm as the day progressed. Catherine took over the household duties without being asked, while Samuel tended to the ranch work. But he found himself looking toward the house more often than necessary, watching for glimpses of her through the windows. That evening, as they shared a simple supper of beans and salt pork she'd transformed into something almost elegant, the conversation flowed easier. She asked about the ranch, about his plans for the winter, about the cattle and the challenges of the territory. Safe topics, but her genuine interest made them feel important. "You know more about ranching than you let on," Samuel observed. "A woman learns what she needs to survive." Catherine said, Robert wasn't much of a teacher, but I paid attention. As night fell, Samuel walked her back to the barn, carrying extra blankets against the growing cold. At the ladder, she paused. 2 nights down, she said softly. 3 to go. You're counting, she smiled, that mysterious expression that made his pulse quicken. Aren't you? This time, when she climbed to the loft, Samuel didn't follow, but he stood there for a long moment, looking up at where she settled into the hay, before forcing himself to return to the empty house. The second night brought no rest, just as she'd predicted. Samuel lay awake, acute awareness of her presence in his barn making sleep impossible. Through his window, he could see the faint glow of her lantern, and he wondered if she, too, lay wakeful in the dark. Tomorrow, Jake Morrison would surely return, bringing more pressure, more threats. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But tonight, in the darkness of his father's house, Samuel Hartley allowed himself to admit a dangerous truth. He was already hoping those 5 nights would somehow stretch into something more. The wind picked up, rattling the windows and bringing the scent of approaching rain. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely, defiant, wild. Samuel closed his eyes and tried not to think about green eyes and mysterious smiles, about the way she'd said his name like it was a secret only they shared. 5 nights. No rest for you. Indeed. The second evening brought storm clouds rolling in from the mountains, heavy and dark as old bruises. Samuel worked frantically to secure the livestock, driving the cattle to sheltered ground while thunder rumbled warnings across the prairie. By the time he finished, the first fat drops of rain had begun to fall. He found Catherine in the kitchen, having already prepared supper and secured the windows against the coming storm. She'd changed into a simple work dress, one of his mother's she must have found in the trunk upstairs, and the sight of her in familiar fabric stirred something deep in his chest. "Storm's going to be bad," he said, water dripping from his hat brim. "The barn roof leaks," she replied, not looking up from where she was slicing bread. "I noticed last night." Samuel frowned. His father had meant to fix that roof before. "You can't stay out there tonight, not in this weather." Now she did look up, those green eyes unreadable. "And where would you have me stay?" The question hung between them like a challenge. The proper answer was obvious. Nowhere. She should ride to town, weather be damned, and find lodging at the boarding house that had already rejected her. But propriety had never kept anyone warm in a Wyoming storm. "There's a room upstairs," Samuel heard himself say. "Was my mother's sewing room. It's small, but dry." Catherine set down the knife carefully. "That's kind of you, but—" A crack of thunder shook the house, and the rain began in earnest, hammering against the windows like desperate fists. "It's practical," Samuel said firmly, finding unexpected authority in his voice. "No sense in you catching your death for the sake of appearances." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Practical." She agreed, though something in her tone suggested she found the word amusing. After supper, Samuel showed her to the small room at the end of the upstairs hall. It still smelled faintly of his mother's lavender water, and dust motes danced in the lamplight. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a rocking chair by the window. "It's perfect," Catherine said softly, running her fingers along the quilt his mother had stitched. "Thank you." Samuel lingered in the doorway, suddenly aware of how the lamplight caught in her hair, how her presence seemed to warm the long, cold room. "I'll be just down the hall if you need anything." "Samuel," his name on her lips stopped him from leaving. "Earlier, when you said your mother had lung fever, that wasn't true, was it?" He turned back, surprised. "How did you—" "The way you looked at her things, the careful way you avoid certain topics." She sat on the edge of the bed, her expression gentle. "She took her own life, didn't she?" The words hit him like a physical blow. No one spoke of it, not even his father. It was the town's polite secret, the thing everyone knew but never acknowledged. "The isolation got to her," Samuel said, his voice rough. "The loneliness. Father tried, but he didn't know how to. She used to cry at night when she thought we were asleep. Then one day, she just stopped crying, stopped talking, stopped everything. Catherine rose and crossed to him, her movements deliberate but gentle. How old were you? 14. The word came out cracked. Found her in the barn. He couldn't finish. Oh, Samuel. She reached up, her palm warm against his cheek. The touch was maternal, comforting, but something else flickered beneath it. No wonder you're trying so hard to be strong. He should have pulled away, should have maintained the careful distance that propriety demanded. Instead, he found himself leaning into her touch, closing his eyes against the unexpected sting of tears. She was from back east, he whispered. Boston. Father met her there on a cattle drive, brought her back like some prize. She tried to love this place, but it never loved her back. The frontier is cruel to gentle souls, Catherine murmured. Her thumb brushed away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. But you're not your mother, Samuel, and you're not your father either. Then what am I? She smiled, sad and knowing. Still becoming. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the eaves like grieving women. They stood there in the doorway, her hand on his face, his eyes holding hers, the space between them electric with possibility. Catherine, he breathed. And suddenly her comfort transformed into something else entirely. The air grew thick, charged with the same energy as the storm outside. She must have felt it too because her hand dropped away, though she didn't step back. We should say good night. We should. He agreed, but neither moved. Lightning illuminated her face, throwing shadows that made her look older, younger, eternal. Samuel had kissed exactly 3 girls in his life, chased pecks at church socials that meant nothing. This felt nothing like those innocent touches. This felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind tugging at his clothes, daring him to jump. If you were older, Catherine said softly. Or if I were younger. I'm old enough, Samuel said, his voice fierce with want and frustration. Everyone keeps saying I'm not, but I'm running a ranch, facing down men like Morrison, making choices that— She silenced him with a finger to his lips. That's not what I meant. Then what? If you were older, you'd know better than to want this. And if I were younger, I might not care about the consequences. She smiled, rueful and tender. But we are what we are, Samuel. A widow with a reputation and a boy trying to protect his inheritance. The world won't be kind to either of us if— She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Samuel understood. In a place where reputation meant the difference between survival and ruin. Some lines couldn't be crossed, not without paying a price neither of them could afford. 3 more nights, he said roughly. 3 more nights, she agreed. This time, when she stepped back, he let her go. The door closed between them with a soft click, and Samuel stood in the hallway, listening to the storm and trying to calm his racing heart. In his own room, sleep remained elusive. The house creaked and groaned under the wind's assault, and knowing she was just down the hall made every sound significant. Was that her footstep, her sigh, or just the old house settling? Near midnight, the storm reached its peak. Lightning struck close enough to illuminate his entire room, and the following thunder seemed to shake the very foundations. Then, through the chaos, he heard it, a cry of distress from down the hall. Samuel was at her door in seconds. "Catherine? I'm all right," came her voice, but it sounded shaky. "Just the storm." He pushed open the door to find her sitting up in bed, the quilt clutched to her chest. In the intermittent lightning, he could see her face, pale, frightened in a way he hadn't seen before. "It's how they came," she whispered. "The men who killed Robert, during a storm like this. Every time thunder cracks, I hear the door breaking, see their faces." Without thinking, Samuel crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." She laughed, but it was broken. "You're sweet to say so, but you don't understand what men like that are capable of. What they did to Robert, what they tried to do to me before I—" She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Before you what?" Samuel asked gently. Catherine looked away. I survived. That's all that matters. But Samuel heard what she didn't say. In this lawless land, survival often came at a terrible cost. He thought of his mother, of the choices that drove her to that final moment in the barn. He thought of his father, strong and righteous, but ultimately unable to save the woman he'd brought to this harsh place. Come here, he said, opening his arms. She hesitated only a moment before moving into his embrace. She fit against him like she belonged there, her head on his shoulder, her body trembling with more than cold. Samuel held her as the storm raged, as lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the prairies. He held her and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Boy becoming man, not through inherited responsibility, but through the simple act of offering comfort to another broken soul. I killed one of them, she whispered against his shirt. Robert's Derringer was in the drawer. When he came for me, I shot him. The others ran, but I'll never forget his face. The surprise, like he couldn't believe a woman would fight back. Samuel tightened his arms around her. You did what you had to do. Did I? Sometimes I think I should have let them, that it would have been more honorable to. No, the word came out harsh. Don't ever think that. You survived. You're here. That's what matters. She pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes luminous in the darkness. When did you become so wise? About 5 minutes ago, he admitted, which surprised a laugh out of her. The storm was beginning to weaken, thunder rolling away toward the east, but neither of them moved to separate. The bed was narrow, forcing them close, and Samuel was acutely aware of every point of contact, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist, the warmth of her breath against his neck. This is dangerous, Catherine murmured, but she made no move to pull away. Everything worth doing is, Samuel replied, then wondered where such words had come from. She tilted her face up toward his, and in that moment, the boy Samuel had been that morning ceased to exist. The man who took his place understood that some choices defined you forever, that some moments demanded courage not of the body but of the heart. The kiss was nothing like he'd imagined. It was soft and fierce at once, tender and desperate, full of longing and sorrow and a wild hope that defied the odds stacked against them. Catherine's hands tangled in his hair, and Samuel pulled her closer, trying to communicate without words everything he felt but couldn't say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the storm had passed. Moonlight streamed through the window, silver and serene. 3 more nights, Catherine said. But now it sounded like a lament. Maybe, Samuel began, but she pressed her fingers to his lips again. No maybes. Not tonight. Tonight, just hold me. Let me pretend the world outside this room doesn't exist. So he did. They lay together on the narrow bed, fully clothed but more intimate than if they'd been bare. Samuel stroked her hair while she told him stories of her childhood in Missouri, of the dreams she'd had before life showed its cruel face. He shared his own memories, the good ones, of his father teaching him to ride, of his mother singing in the kitchen before the sadness took her. Dawn was creeping over the horizon when exhaustion finally claimed them. They slept curled together like survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to each other as if letting go meant drowning. When Samuel woke, the sun was high and Catherine was gone. He found her in the kitchen, dressed properly again, making breakfast as if the night had been a dream. But the glance she gave him over her shoulder, full of warmth and warning in equal measure, told him it had been real. Good morning, she said carefully. Good morning, he replied, matching her tone. They were back to pretending, to maintaining the careful boundaries that kept the world at bay. But something had fundamentally changed. The storm had washed away more than dust and debris. It had washed away the last of Samuel's innocence and revealed something raw and real beneath. 3 more nights. But now those words carried the weight of a countdown to either salvation or damnation. And Samuel, standing in his mother's kitchen watching sunlight play in Catherine's dark hair, couldn't say which he hoped for more. The day after, the storm dawned clear and crisp, but the peace was shattered before the morning coffee had cooled. Jake Morrison arrived with Sheriff Wallace and 2 deputies, their horses' hooves thundering across the still damp earth like drums of war. Samuel met them on the porch, his father's Winchester propped against the rail within easy reach. Catherine remained inside, visible through the window but keeping her distance. "Morning, Sheriff," Samuel said evenly. "Mr. Morrison." Sheriff Wallace, a lean man with tired eyes and a gray mustache, dismounted slowly. "Samuel, heard you've been having some interesting company. Man has a right to offer Christian charity on his own land," Samuel replied. Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Christian charity." He made the words sound like a curse. "That what they're calling it now? Jake here says the woman staying with you is Catherine Dalton," the sheriff continued, his tone carefully neutral. "Says she's wanted for questioning in the death of a man in Kansas." Samuel's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression steady. "Questioning isn't the same as accused." "No, it ain't," Wallace agreed. "But it does mean I need to speak with her." The door opened, and Catherine stepped onto the porch. She'd pinned her hair severely back and wore her traveling dress, looking every inch the respectable widow. Only Samuel caught the slight tremor in her hands. "I'm Catherine Dalton," she said clearly. "How can I help you, Sheriff?" Wallace touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, I've got some questions about an incident in Dodge City 2 years back. Man named Carl Hutchins was found shot dead. Word is you were the last to see him alive." "Carl Hutchins was one of 3 men who broke into my home after murdering my husband," Catherine said, her voice steady as iron. "I defended myself. The marshal in Dodge City cleared me of any wrongdoing." "That may be, ma'am. But there's been new information. Hutchins' brothers are saying it wasn't self-defense. They're pushing for a new investigation." Morrison smiled, ugly and triumphant. "Seems the good widow here has a habit of leaving dead men in her wake." Samuel stepped forward. "That's enough. Morrison." "Is it, boy?" Morrison's eyes glittered with malice. "Your father would be rolling in his grave, knowing you're harboring a killer." "My father would have done exactly what I'm doing," Samuel shot back. "He'd have protected someone who needed protecting." "Noble words," Morrison drawled. "But nobility don't mean much when your ranch is forfeit. You miss that loan payment to the bank next week." Samuel stiffened. The payment. In the chaos of his father's death and Catherine's arrival, he'd almost forgotten. $300, due in 5 days. "That's between me and the bank," he said. "Everything's connected out here, boy." Morrison's smile widened. "Banks don't like lending to men of poor judgment, men who consort with killers and loose women." Catherine's hand found Samuel's arm, a warning pressure. "Sheriff Wallace," she said, addressing the lawman directly. "Am I under arrest?" Wallace shifted uncomfortably. "No, ma'am, not at this time, but I'd advise you not to leave the area. There may be more questions." "I'll be here for 3 more days," Catherine said simply. "After that, I move on. That was my arrangement with Mr. Hartley. 3 days. Morrison's voice dripped satisfaction. "Plenty of time for all sorts of things to happen." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Samuel's hand inched toward the rifle, but Wallace cleared his throat. "That's enough. Jake, we've done what we came to do." The sheriff mounted his horse, then looked back at Samuel. "Son, a word of advice. Your father was a good man, respected. That respect doesn't transfer automatic-like. You want to keep this ranch. You need to think careful about the company you keep." They rode off, leaving dust and dread in their wake. Samuel stood rigid until they disappeared over the rise. Then his shoulders slumped. "The loan payment," Catherine said quietly. "How short are you?" $150. The number tasted like defeat. "Cattle prices are down, and I had to pay for the funeral. I have money," she said. Samuel turned to her, shocked. "What?" "Not much, but enough, hidden in my saddlebags. It's yours if you need it. I can't take your money. Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now." Her green eyes were fierce. "Morrison wants this land. He'll use any excuse to take it. Don't give him one. Samuel wanted to argue, but the truth of her words was undeniable. Without that payment, the bank would foreclose. Morrison probably had the foreclosure papers drawn up already. "I'll pay you back," he said roughly. "I know you will." That evening, after a day of tense preparation and worried glances, Samuel found himself restless again. Catherine had returned to the barn despite his protests, insisting that appearances mattered more now than ever. But as darkness fell and the lamp in the loft glowed like a beacon, he couldn't stay away. He found her brushing her hair, the long dark strands catching the light. She'd changed into a simple nightgown, another of his mother's, and the sight of her made his chest tight. "You shouldn't be here," she said without turning. "It's my barn." He climbed up and sat across from her, maintaining careful distance. "Tell me about Hutchins, the truth of it." Catherine's hand stilled. "I told the truth. He broke in with 2 others. They'd been drinking, celebrating what they'd done to Robert. They thought I'd be easy prey, a woman alone, grieving." Her voice turned hard. "They were wrong. The brothers want revenge. The brothers want money. They think I have some hidden fortune, that Robert left more than debts." She laughed bitterly. "If only that were true." Samuel studied her profile in the lamplight. "Why didn't you tell me about the investigation? Would it have mattered?" He considered lying, then shook his head. "No." She turned to him then, a sad smile playing at her lips. "You're going to lose everything because of me. Your ranch, your reputation. Maybe more. Maybe," Samuel agreed. "Or maybe I'll find something worth more than all of that." "You're so young," she whispered. "Stop saying that." The words came out harsh with frustration. "I'm young, yes, but I've buried both parents, run a ranch, faced down men twice my age. When does young stop being an excuse?" Catherine set down her brush and moved closer, close enough that her nightgown brushed his knee. "You want to know when? When you stop asking. When the weight of your choices sits so heavy that you'd give anything to be young again. To not know what you know. And what do you know? That every choice costs something. That survival means doing things that stain your soul. That sometimes love isn't enough to save anyone." Samuel reached out, catching her hand in his. "But sometimes it is." She looked at their joined hands, his sun-brown and work-roughened, hers pale and delicate despite their hidden strength. "Samuel." "I know," he said. 3 more nights. But right now, in this moment, can we pretend that doesn't matter?" Instead of answering, she leaned into him. The kiss was different from the night before, less desperate, more deliberate, a choice made with eyes open to the consequences. Samuel's hands tangled in her hair as she pressed against him, soft and warm and utterly present. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This is madness." "The best kind," Samuel murmured against her throat. She laughed, a sound caught between joy and sorrow. "You don't know what you're risking." "Don't I?" He pulled back to look at her. "Morrison will ruin me whether you stay or go. The town already thinks I'm a fool. At least this way. I'm a fool for something that matters." Catherine cupped his face in her hands, studying him as if memorizing every detail. "In another life, Samuel Hartley, I would have waited for you. I would have been the proper girl at the church social, batting her eyes and blushing at your attention." "I don't want that girl," Samuel said fiercely. "I want you, exactly as you are, shadows and secrets and all." She kissed him again, deeper this time, and Samuel felt something wild and reckless rise in his chest. His hands found the warmth of her waist through the thin fabric, and she sighed against his mouth, a sound that nearly undid him. "Catherine," he breathed, and her name was prayer and plea combined. She pulled back, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Not like this," she whispered. "Not in a barn, hiding like criminals. You deserve better. We both do." Samuel wanted to argue, but he saw the wisdom in her words. Whatever happened between them, it shouldn't be born of desperation and shadow. "Tomorrow night." he said. "Come to the house. Have dinner with me. Let them see us through the windows if they want. I'm tired of hiding. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. At least let it also be honest." Catherine searched his face, then nodded slowly. "All right. One dinner, one normal evening." They talked until late, sharing stories and dreams while carefully skirting the heat that simmered between them. When Samuel finally returned to the house, he felt changed at a fundamental level. Not just older, but clearer in his purpose. 3 more nights. Morrison circling like a vulture, the sheriff's questions hanging like a sword. A loan payment that would take everything Catherine had saved. But as Samuel lay in his bed, watching clouds drift across the moon through his window, he found himself smiling. His father had always said a man needed something worth fighting for. Now Samuel had found his. The 3rd night had passed, leaving 2 more. 2 more nights to find a way forward. 2 more nights to prove that sometimes love could indeed be enough, if only the world would let them. The 4th day brought trouble with the dawn. Samuel woke to the sound of horses, too many horses. He grabbed his father's colt from the nightstand and rushed to the window. 6 riders approached through the morning mist, and even at a distance, he recognized the lead man's scarred face from wanted posters. Bill Hutchins, Carl's brother. Samuel threw on his clothes and boots, his mind racing. Catherine was in the house. She'd stayed after their dinner, taking the spare room again when rain threatened. He had to get her out before— "Samuel Hartley!" The voice boomed across the yard. "We've come for the woman. Send her out, and we'll leave peaceful like." Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, Colt tucked in his belt. The 6 men had spread out in a half circle, cutting off escape routes. Bill Hutchins sat his horse like a man accustomed to violence, his face a roadmap of old fights and bitter years. "You're on my land," Samuel said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Turn around and ride out." Hutchins laughed, an ugly sound. "Boy thinks he's his daddy. Listen here, pup, that woman killed my brother, shot him down like a dog. In self-defense, after you and your brother murdered her husband. That's her story." Hutchins spat. "Way I heard it, she lured Carl to that house, played the grieving widow until he let his guard down, then shot him for the money he was carrying." "You heard wrong." The door opened behind him. Catherine stepped out, and Samuel's heart sank. She'd dressed hastily but held herself with that dignity he'd come to admire. In her hand was Robert's Derringer, the same gun that had killed Carl Hutchins. "Let them speak their piece," she said quietly. "They've ridden a long way for their version of justice. Catherine, get back inside." "No." She moved to stand beside him, the small gun steady in her hand. "I'm tired of running, tired of hiding." She addressed Hutchins directly. "Your brother was a murderer and worse. He got what men like him deserve." Hutchins' face darkened. "You admit it then? You murdered him." "I defended myself. There's a difference, though I doubt you'd understand it." "Enough talk." One of the other riders, younger and twitchy, started to draw his pistol. "Let's take her and—" The crack of a rifle split the morning air. The young man's hat flew off, and he froze, hand halfway to his gun. Samuel lowered his smoking rifle, already levering another round. "Next one won't be a warning," he said. 6 against 2. Hutchins observed. "You sure you want to die for this woman, boy?" "The question," said a new voice, "is whether you want to die at all." Everyone turned. 3 riders emerged from behind the barn, Sheriff Wallace and 2 deputies, all armed, all wearing tin stars that caught the morning light. "Sheriff," Hutchins growled, "this ain't your jurisdiction. It is when armed men threaten citizens in my county." Wallace rode forward, positioning himself between the Hutchins gang and the porch. "Misses. Dalton was cleared by the marshal in Dodge. That stands until a judge says otherwise. She's a killer, and you're about 10 seconds from becoming one yourself." Wallace's hand rested on his pistol. "Or becoming dead. Your choice." The tension stretched taut as wire. Samuel kept his rifle trained on the twitchy younger man, acutely aware of Catherine beside him, of the way morning light caught on the barrel of her derringer. Finally, Hutchins yanked his horse's head around. "This ain't over. That woman owes a blood debt, and blood debts get paid, one way or another." They rode off in a thunder of hooves and dust. Wallace waited until they disappeared before dismounting. "They'll be back," he said simply. "Men like that don't give up easy." "Why did you help us?" Catherine asked. Wallace looked tired, older than his years. "Because I knew Tom Hartley, and he was a good man. Because I've seen what men like Hutchins do when the law doesn't step in." He paused. "And because I did some checking. The marshal in Dodge. Jim Peterson? He sent a telegram. Says you're telling the truth about that night. Says Carl Hutchins had it coming." Relief flickered across Catherine's face. "Then I'm clear. Of legal charges. Maybe. But that won't stop Hutchins. He wants revenge, not justice." Wallace turned to Samuel. "You sure you want to be in the middle of this, son?" Samuel didn't hesitate. "I'm sure." Wallace studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You've got spine. Boy, your father would be proud." He mounted his horse. "I'll post a deputy in town. Keep an eye out. But if I were you, I'd be ready for trouble." After the sheriff left, Samuel and Catherine stood alone on the porch, the morning suddenly too quiet. "You should leave," Catherine said softly. "Today, before they come back." "Is that what you want?" She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "What I want doesn't matter. I won't have your blood on my hands, and I won't have you facing them alone." Samuel set down his rifle and took her shoulders. "We're past the point of easy choices. Catherine, stay or go, fight or run. We're in this together now." She searched his face. "When did you become so stubborn?" "About 3 days ago, when a mysterious widow asked for shelter in my barn. Despite everything." She smiled. "5 nights. No rest for you. I warned you." Best warning I ever ignored. They spent the day preparing. Samuel cleaned and loaded every weapon in the house, while Catherine organized supplies, food, water, ammunition. They worked in companionable silence, occasionally brushing against each other in passing, each touch a reminder of what they were fighting for. As evening approached, Samuel made a decision. He found Catherine in the kitchen, rolling bandages with practiced efficiency. "Marry me." She dropped the bandage. "What?" "Marry me, tonight. There's a traveling preacher in town, Reverend Mills. He could—" "Samuel, no." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "You can't throw your life away for love?" He caught her hand. "For the first real thing I've felt since my mother died? For the only person who's ever looked at me and seen who I really am? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than anyone gives you credit for. I know you make me want to be better than I am. I know that whether we have 5 nights or 50 years, I want to spend them with you." Catherine pulled away, pacing to the window. "A marriage born from danger isn't— Every marriage out here is born from danger. From the gamble that the crops won't fail, the cattle won't die, the Indians won't attack. At least our danger has a face and a name." She laughed, short and bitter. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple." Samuel crossed to her, turning her to face him. "I love you. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe it's too fast, but it's true. And if Hutchins comes back, if Morrison takes the ranch, if the whole world turns against us, at least we'll face it together." Catherine's composure finally cracked. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pressed her face against his chest. "You impossible boy. You beautiful, impossible boy. Is that a yes?" She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "God help me, it is." They rode to town as the sun set, turning the sky to flame. Reverend Mills, a thin man with kind eyes, asked no questions beyond the necessary ones. The ceremony was simple, a few words in his small parlor, his wife as witness. Plain gold bands Samuel bought from the general store. "Do you, Samuel, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Catherine, take this man?" "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was brief, appropriate for the setting. but Samuel felt it burn through him like lightning. When they signed the register, Catherine's hand trembled slightly as she wrote Catherine Hartley for the first time. Outside, full dark had fallen. They rode home in silence, each lost in the magnitude of what they'd done. At the ranch, Samuel helped her down from her horse, holding her a moment longer than necessary. "No regrets?" he asked. "1,000 regrets," she said softly. "But not about this. Never about this." They went inside, and for the first time climbed the stairs together as husband and wife. In the soft lamplight of Samuel's room, their room now, Catherine turned to him with eyes full of love and sorrow mixed. "This is our 4th night," she whispered. Tomorrow we face whatever comes," Samuel said, drawing her close. "But tonight, you're my wife, and I'm your husband, and nothing else matters." She kissed him then, deep and true, and Samuel understood at last what it meant to be a man, not through inherited land or faced dangers, but through the choice to bind your life to another's, to say yes to love despite all the reasons to say no. Outside, coyotes howled and night birds called, the eternal chorus of the frontier, but inside, in the circle of lamplight and love, Samuel and Catherine created their own world, fragile as frost, precious as water in the desert, worth any price that tomorrow might demand. The 4th night passed in whispers and warmth, in the discovery of each other and the forging of a bond that would be tested by fire come morning. But for now, for these stolen hours, they were simply two souls who had found home in each other's arms, and if the world would grant them nothing else, at least they'd had this, one perfect night when love conquered fear and hope burned brighter than all the shadows gathering at their door. The 5th dawn came blood-red, painting the prairie in shades of warning. Samuel woke with Catherine in his arms, her dark hair spread across his chest, and for a moment allowed himself to pretend this was just another morning of many to come. But the sound of approaching horses shattered that illusion. "They're here," Catherine whispered, already awake, already knowing. They dressed quickly, efficiently, like soldiers preparing for battle. Samuel strapped on his father's gun belt while Catherine tucked the derringer into her dress pocket. Downstairs, they took positions, Samuel at the front window with the rifle, Catherine at the side window with his mother's old shotgun. But it wasn't the Hutchins gang that rode into view. It was worse. Jake Morrison led a group of 20 men, including the banker Harold Fitzgerald, several prominent townsmen, and enough hired guns to make their intentions clear. They stopped just outside rifle range, Morrison riding forward with a document in his hand. "Samuel Hartley," he called. "I've got a court order here. Seems you've been harboring a wanted fugitive. Judge says that voids your claim to this land." "What judge?" Samuel shouted back. "Judge Brennan, over in Laramie. Says a man who consorts with killers ain't fit to hold property." Morrison's smile was visible even at this distance. "You've got 1 hour to vacate." Catherine put a hand on Samuel's arm. "That's impossible. No judge would—" "Brennan's in Morrison's pocket," Samuel said grimly. "Has been for years. Then we'll fight it in court. Get a real judge." "With what money? And who'll hold the ranch while we're fighting?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "No. This ends today, one way or another." He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Morrison, you want this land? Come and take it. Boy's got spine." One of the hired guns muttered, "Boy's got a death wish." Morrison corrected, "Burn them out." The first torch arced through the air, landing on the barn's roof. Then another, and another. Samuel fired, dropping one of the torch throwers. But there were too many. Smoke began to rise as the dry wood caught. "The horses!" Catherine cried. "Go," Samuel said, firing again. "I'll cover you." She ran for the barn while Samuel laid down covering fire, forcing Morrison's men to take cover. He saw her disappear into the smoke and prayed she'd make it out. Then everything went to hell. Gunfire erupted from the east. The Hutchins gang had arrived. But instead of joining Morrison, they opened fire on everyone. Bill Hutchins had come for Catherine and didn't care who stood in his way. Crossfire, Samuel muttered, ducking as bullets splintered the porch rail. The barn doors burst open and horses stampeded out, Catherine driving them with shouts and waving arms. She emerged coughing, her dress singed, the shotgun still in her hands. A Hutchins rider bore down on her, and she fired both barrels, knocking him from his saddle. Samuel's heart stopped as he saw Bill Hutchins himself spurring toward her. Pistol raised, without thinking, Samuel vaulted the porch rail and ran, knowing he'd never make it in time. But Catherine had learned to survive. She rolled aside as Hutchins fired, came up with a derringer, and put a bullet in his shoulder. He wheeled away, cursing, and Samuel reached her just as Morrison's men decided to advance. "The house," he gasped. "We need cover." They ran together, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. Behind them, the barn was fully ablaze, black smoke rolling across the battlefield. Morrison's men and the Hutchins gang were shooting at each other now, old grievances and new chaos turning the ranch into a war zone. They made it inside and barricaded the door. Through the windows, they could see men falling on both sides. The fire had spread to the chicken coop and was approaching the house. "We're trapped," Catherine said, reloading with steady hands. Maybe not. Samuel had spotted Sheriff Wallace and a posse of legitimate lawmen approaching from the south, drawn by the smoke. "The cavalry's coming. Too late for the ranch," Catherine said softly, watching their dreams burn. "But not for us." Samuel pulled her close. "We're alive. We're together. Everything else can be rebuilt." The next minutes were chaos. Wallace's men charged into the battle, badges glinting, adding their guns to the melee. Morrison tried to rally his hired guns, but they were caught between three forces now. The Hutchins gang, reduced to 3 men, tried to flee but ran straight into the deputies. Samuel and Catherine fired from the windows when targets presented themselves, but mostly they watched the tide turn slowly, inevitably. The gunfire dwindled. Men lay groaning in the dust. Others raised their hands in surrender. Then Samuel saw him, Morrison, sneaking around the side of the house, pistol in hand, face twisted with rage. The old man had lost everything in this gambit and seemed determined to take someone with him. "Catherine," Samuel said quietly, but she'd already seen. Morrison kicked in the side door, gun raised, and time seemed to slow. Samuel moved to shield Catherine, knowing he was too far away. Catherine raised the derringer, knowing she'd already fired both shots. Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger. The shotgun blast took Morrison in the chest, spinning him around. He collapsed in the doorway, eyes already going glassy. Behind him stood Wallace, smoke rising from his scattergun. "Never did like that man," the sheriff said conversationally. In the sudden silence that followed, they could hear the fire crackling, men moaning, horses neighing in distress. The battle was over, but at terrible cost. The barn was gone, along with half the outbuildings. Bodies littered the yard. The ranch Samuel had inherited was effectively destroyed. "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come—" "Then I'd have lost it to Morrison anyway," Samuel said firmly, just more slowly, with less honor. Wallace stepped over Morrison's body, his face grim. "Bill Hutchins is dead. So are half his gang. The rest are in custody or run off." He looked at Catherine. "I'd say that debt is paid. Ma'am, nobody will come looking for you again." She nodded, sagging against Samuel. He held her up, held her close. This woman who'd brought violence and salvation in equal measure. "What about the judge's order?" Samuel asked. Wallace snorted. "What order? I don't see any order. Just a bunch of dead outlaws who tried to steal a man's land." He looked around at the destruction. "You'll need help rebuilding." "With what money?" "That's the interesting thing." Wallace said, "Seems Morrison was carrying quite a sum on him. Probably meant to pay off his hired guns, as his killer in a lawful shooting. I'd say that money belongs to whoever has the strongest claim." He winked, like maybe the man whose land he was trying to steal. It wasn't until later, after the bodies were cleared and the fires doused, that Samuel and Catherine stood alone among the ruins. The house still stood, scorched but solid. Everything else would need to be rebuilt from scratch. "The fifth night," Catherine said softly. "I told you, no rest. You were right." Samuel surveyed the damage. "But you were also wrong." "Oh." He turned to her, his wife, his partner, his salvation. "You said 5 nights, but I'm planning on 5,000 more, 10,000, however many we get." She smiled through her tears. "That's a lot of restless nights. I can think of worse fates." As the sun set on their 5th night together, painting the sky the color of hope and flame, Samuel and Catherine Hartley stood hand in hand among the ashes of the old life. Tomorrow they would begin building the new one. There would be lumber to order, workers to hire, a barn to raise. The neighboring ranchers who'd stayed neutral would need convincing that the young couple could succeed. The bank would need their payment. Morrison's money would cover that and more. But tonight, as the first stars appeared above the Wyoming territory, they had each other, a marriage forged in fire, tested by violence, and somehow, impossibly, still standing. "No regrets?" Samuel asked as they walked toward their damaged but defiant house. Catherine squeezed his hand. "Only one." "What's that?" "I should have asked for 10 nights, she said, and her laugh was bright as silver in the gathering dark. 5 wasn't nearly enough. Inside, they lit lamps against the darkness and set about making dinner in their smoke-stained kitchen. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the empty prairie, and the wind whispered secrets through the grass. The Hartley Ranch would rise again, stronger for having been tested. And if sometimes, in the years to come, people asked how young Samuel Hartley had kept his land and won his bride in the same violent week, he would smile and say only, "She warned me I wouldn't get any rest. I should have listened." But they both knew the truth, that some storms you weather not by hiding but by holding tight to what matters most. And in the wild heart of the frontier, where love and death walked hand in hand, they had chosen love and never looked back. The town meeting hall buzzed with gossip and judgment. 3 days after the shootout, Samuel and Catherine stood before a crowd of their neighbors, facing the court of public opinion that could prove more devastating than any gunfight. Mayor Thompson, a portly man who'd avoided taking sides during the conflict, banged his gavel for order. "We're here to discuss the, events at the Hartley Ranch," he began, mopping his brow despite the cool morning, "and to determine what's to be done about the situation." "What's to be done?" Martha Garrett, the boarding house owner, stood up with righteous indignation. "A woman of questionable character has brought death and destruction to our peaceful community. She should be run out of town." Murmurs of agreement rippled through certain sections of the crowd. Samuel felt Catherine tense beside him, but she kept her chin high, refusing to be cowed. "Mrs. Garrett," Samuel said, his voice carrying over the noise, "with respect, the only destruction came from men trying to steal my land. My wife defended herself in our home, unless self-defense is now a crime." "Your wife?" Banker Fitzgerald nearly choked. "You married this, careful, Mr. Fitzgerald," Sheriff Wallace warned from his position by the door. "The next word out of your mouth better be lady, or we'll have another problem." Old Doc Pritchard stood up, his cane tapping the floor. "I've lived in this town for 30 years, seen it grow from nothing to something. And I'll tell you what threatens a community. It ain't a woman defending herself. It's men like Morrison who use money and intimidation to take what ain't theirs." "Morrison's dead," someone shouted. "And the world's better for it," Pritchard shot back. "That man held mortgages on half the county, squeezed good folks dry. Young Hartley here had the courage to stand up to him." Catherine finally spoke, her voice clear and strong. "May I address the assembly?" Thompson looked uncomfortable but nodded. Catherine stepped forward, and Samuel saw her transform, no longer the weary widow, but a woman fighting for her place in the world. "You're right to be angry," she began, surprising everyone. "Violence came to your town because of me. Good men died because of choices made long ago. But I ask you, what was my alternative when my husband was murdered? Should I have laid down and died too? When his killers came for me, should I have submitted to preserve some notion of feminine propriety? She looked around the room, meeting hostile gazes without flinching. I've been moving from town to town for 2 years, carrying the weight of survival like a crime, but I'm tired of running, tired of apologizing for being alive. Pretty words. Mrs. Garrett sniffed. But that doesn't change what you are. And what am I, exactly? Catherine's eyes flashed. A widow who refused to remarry the first man who offered? A woman who worked with her hands instead of accepting charity? Or simply someone who had the audacity to defend herself when attacked? Samuel stepped forward, taking his place beside her. My father built his ranch with courage and determination. He'd be ashamed if I let it stand for anything less. Catherine, my wife, has shown more courage than most men I know. If this town can't see that, then maybe it's not the place I thought it was. The boy's got a point, said Henry Chen. Who ran the general store? Morrison's been bleeding us dry for years, but we all looked the other way. These two had the spine to fight back. At what cost? Fitzgerald demanded. The territorial governor's asking questions. Investors are nervous. This kind of violence was brought by outsiders. Wallace interrupted. The Hutchins gang. Morrison's hired guns, not by the Hartleys. The crowd began to split, arguments breaking out between those who valued order above justice and those who'd suffered under Morrison's thumb. Samuel watched, realizing this was about more than just him and Catherine. It was about what kind of town they wanted to be. Then Ellen Kowalski stood up. The Polish immigrant ran the laundry, a woman who kept to herself and rarely spoke at town meetings. Mrs. Hartley did my washing, she said in accented but clear English. When I was sick last winter, did it for free. Never told anyone. Good woman, good heart. I stand with her. One by one, others stood. Tom Brennan, the blacksmith, the Yamamoto family who ran the restaurant, Sarah Miles, the schoolteacher. Not a majority, but enough. Enough to show that Catherine wasn't alone. Thompson gavelled for order again. It seems the town is divided. Perhaps a compromise. No compromise. Samuel said firmly, we're staying, we're rebuilding, and we're going to make the Hartley Ranch something this county can be proud of. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with Sheriff Wallace. Or with me. Doc Pritchard added, surprising everyone. I'm investing in the Hartley Ranch. Seems like a good bet? Backing folks with courage. That shifted the tide. If Doc Pritchard, respected elder of the community, was willing to invest, maybe the Hartleys weren't the pariahs some wanted them to be. After the meeting, small groups of supporters approached. Tom Brennan offered to help raise the new barn. The Yamamotos promised supplies at fair prices. Ellen Kowalski simply pressed Catherine's hand and whispered, you stay strong. But it was Sarah Miles who provided the most unexpected support. The young schoolteacher pulled Samuel aside as the crowd dispersed. Your mother, she said quietly. I knew her. We used to talk sometimes. When she came to town. Samuel stiffened. Oh. She was brilliant. Had read more books than anyone I knew. The isolation killed her spirit, but it wasn't weakness. It was the tragedy of a bright mind with nowhere to shine. Sarah glanced at Catherine, who was speaking with Doc Pritchard. Your wife reminds me of her. Same intelligence, but stronger. Don't let this place break her like it broke your mother. I won't, Samuel promised, his throat tight. That evening, as they surveyed their damaged ranch, Catherine slipped her hand into his. We won today, but the real fight's just beginning. Rebuilding will take everything we have. Morrison's money will help, and Doc's investment. It's not just about money. She turned to face him. Those people who stood up for us, we owe them. We have to prove they were right to take that chance. Samuel nodded, understanding. We'll make this ranch a place of refuge, fair wages for workers, fair deals with suppliers. Everything Morrison wasn't. Your father would be proud, Catherine said softly. I hope so. They walked through the ruins of the barn, planning where to build the new one. The setting sun turned the wreckage to gold, transforming destruction into possibility. I've been thinking, Catherine said, about what Ellen Kowalski said, about me doing her washing. That was kind of you. It was survival. I needed the money, but she remembered it as kindness. Catherine stopped walking, her expression thoughtful. Maybe that's how we rebuild, not just the buildings, but the community. Show them that strength and compassion can exist in the same place. Samuel pulled her close. Mrs. Hartley, you're either going to save this town or scandalize it to death. Can't I do both? She asked with a smile that still made his heart race. That night, in their smoke-damaged bedroom, they made plans, not just for barns and fences, but for a future neither had dared imagine. A ranch that employed drifters and widows, giving second chances to those who needed them. A home that welcomed strangers, remembering how a plea for shelter had changed both their lives. 5 nights, Catherine murmured as they lay entwined. Who would have thought 5 nights could change everything? 6 now, Samuel corrected, kissing her temple. And tomorrow makes 7. Are you planning to count them all? Everyone, until we're old and gray and can't remember where we left our teeth. She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. Samuel Hartley, you impossible romantic. You made me this way. That first night, when you stood in my barn and told me I'd get no rest, you were warning me about more than just trouble. Was I? She traced patterns on his chest. And what was I warning you about? That loving you would be the adventure of a lifetime. That choosing you would mean choosing to fight for something bigger than myself. He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. That 5 nights with you would be worth more than 50 years of safety. Outside, the October wind howled around the corners of their wounded house, but inside they were warm, safe, together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch needed rebuilding. The town needed convincing. Their reputations needed mending. But tonight, on their 6th night together, Samuel and Catherine Hartley had everything they needed, each other, a future to build, and the courage to face whatever came next. In the wild Wyoming territory, where violence and tenderness walked hand in hand, they'd chosen love and made it their foundation. And if the world wanted to test that foundation, well, they'd proven they could weather any storm. Together. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the prairie in pristine white just as the new barn's frame rose against the sky. Samuel stood with Tom Brennan and a crew of workers, their breath misting in the cold air as they hefted the final beam into place. 6 weeks had passed since the shootout. 6 weeks of grueling work and gradual acceptance. She's looking good, Brennan said, wiping sweat despite the chill. Better than the old one. Catherine designed it. Samuel said with pride. Said if we're rebuilding, might as well improve. Through the skeleton of the barn, he could see his wife directing another crew in restoring the chicken coop. She wore men's work clothes, another scandal for the gossips, but moved with purpose and authority that made arguments seem petty. Never thought I'd see the day, Brennan mused. A woman bossing around a construction crew, and them listening happy as you please. She pays fair wages and knows what she's talking about. Men respect that, whatever the package it comes in. Doc Pritchard approached on his old mare, picking his way carefully through the construction debris. Samuel, Catherine, he called. Got news from Cheyenne. They gathered in the half-finished kitchen, where Catherine had managed to create an oasis of warmth and order amid the chaos. She served coffee while Doc shared his news. The territorial governor's dropping any investigation into the Morrison affair, he announced. Seems several prominent citizens wrote letters explaining the true situation. Judge Brennan's under investigation himself for corruption. Catherine's hand found Samuel's under the table. Another weight lifted. Another threat dissolved. There's more, Doc continued. Word of what you're doing here is spread. The fair wages, the second chances. I've had 3 inquiries this week from folks wanting to invest. Seems the Hartley Ranch is becoming something of a symbol. Of what? Samuel asked. Progress. Hope. The idea that the frontier doesn't have to be ruled by the strongest fist or the deepest pocket. Doc smiled. You've started something, whether you meant to or not. That evening, as was becoming their custom, Samuel and Catherine walked their land together. The setting sun turned the snow pink and gold, transforming the prairie into something from a fairy tale. "Our last night," Catherine said softly. Samuel looked at her, confused. "What?" "The 5th night. You said 5 nights. No rest for you. Tomorrow starts our new count." I'd forgotten. He pulled her close. "Seems like a lifetime ago." It was. We're different people now than we were then. They stopped at a small rise overlooking the ranch. Below them, workers were finishing for the day. Smoke rising from the bunkhouse Catherine had insisted on building first. "No one sleeps in barns on our land," she'd said, and that had been that. "Do you regret it?" Samuel asked. "The violence, the notoriety. You could have kept moving, found somewhere peaceful, and missed this." Catherine gestured at their domain. "Missed you?" "Never." She turned in his arms. "Do you regret taking in a dangerous widow who brought nothing but trouble?" "You brought me to life," Samuel said simply. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, trying to fill my father's boots without understanding what made him worth following. And now? Now I know it wasn't about being strong or tough. It was about standing for something, creating something worth protecting." He kissed her forehead. "You taught me that." They made their way back as stars began to appear. In the house, warm and lamp-lit, they found an unexpected visitor. Sarah Miles sat at their kitchen table, looking nervous but determined. "I'm sorry to intrude," she began, "but I have a proposal." "Sit, please," Catherine said, pouring tea. "What kind of proposal?" "I want to start a school. A real school. Not just the one room in town. Someplace that could board students from outlying ranches, give them proper education." Sarah took a breath. "I was hoping you might consider hosting it here. You have the land, and after the barn's done—" "Yes," Catherine said immediately. Samuel laughed. "Don't you want to discuss it first?" "What's to discuss? Children need education. We have space. Sarah needs support. We can provide it." Catherine's eyes shone. "Besides, this place could use the sound of children." They talked late into the night. Planning. Sarah's vision aligned perfectly with what Samuel and Catherine were building. A place of opportunity, of second chances, of hope in a hard land. After Sarah left, full of plans and gratitude, Samuel and Catherine sat by their fire. The house around them still showed scars from the battle, but it felt like home in a way it never had before. "A school," Samuel mused. "My mother would have loved that." "She's part of why I said yes," Catherine admitted. "What Sarah said about her, about brilliant minds with nowhere to shine. How many others are out there, limited by circumstance rather than ability? And you want to change that." "We want to change that," she corrected. "Partners, remember?" As they prepared for bed. Catherine paused at the window. "Look," she whispered. Samuel joined her. Below, in the moonlight, a small herd of deer grazed near the new barn. Unafraid. The ranch that had seen so much violence was becoming a haven again. "My father used to say the land remembers," Samuel said. "Good and bad both. We've given it plenty of bad memories. Then we'll just have to make more good ones." Catherine said practically, "Starting tomorrow. Our 7th day." Samuel noted. "A new beginning. Every day's a new beginning, if you're brave enough to take it." They stood together, watching the peaceful scene below. Two souls who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. The widow and the young rancher, bringing light to a dark place, building something beautiful from ashes and determination. That night, their last of the original 5, they made love with a tenderness born of survival, of chosen commitment rather than desperate passion. In the quiet aftermath, as snow began to fall again outside their window, Catherine whispered those same words that had started everything. 5 nights. No rest for you. The best unrest of my life. Samuel replied, and worth every sleepless moment. Morning would bring new challenges. The barn to finish, the school to plan, investors to meet, a community to continue winning over. Their path would never be easy in this untamed land where tradition died hard and change came at a cost. But they'd proven that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that courage could overcome prejudice, that two broken people could build something whole and strong and worth fighting for. The Hartley Ranch stood as testament to that truth, no longer just a piece of land to be inherited or stolen, but a symbol of what the frontier could become, a place where widows found new purpose, where young men became leaders through compassion rather than violence, where the American dream took root in unexpected ways and at its heart. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest adventure wasn't in taming the land, but in opening your heart to another soul brave enough to say yes to the journey. 5 nights had become forever. And in the wild Wyoming territory, under an endless sky full of possibilities, Samuel and Catherine Hartley faced their future together, unafraid, united, and utterly, completely alive. The rest, as they say, is history. But it's a history still being written. One day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And if those 5 nights taught them anything, it's that the best stories are the ones where love wins. Not easily, not without cost, but triumphantly and true. In the West, where legends are born from grit and gunpowder, theirs was a different kind of tale. A love story. Yes, but more than that. A story of transformation, of how two people refused to let the hardness of the world make them hard in turn. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the untamed American West. I hope Samuel and Catherine's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening to this tale? Leave a comment below. I'd love to know if you're by a cozy fire, on a long drive, or perhaps even somewhere out on the prairie under the same vast sky our lovers shared. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of courage, passion, and the indomitable human spirit. Share your thoughts about Samuel and Catherine's journey. Did their love story capture the essence of the frontier for you? Until next time, partners.